Alright, so the first poem I'm going to do, it starts with an apology to the poets Amanda Chong and Alfian Saad, because this poem borrows lines from their pieces and then got them stained and forgot to return them. It's called the Merlion poem. You emerged from the sea, claws gripping shoreline, scales iridescent in sunlight, back arching, rising, thrashing out of waves, droplets of salt water cascading off your shining, muscular torso. You shook your magnificent head from side to side, like a dog after a bath, because you are too dignified to do it otherwise. Oh, Merlion, now you perch. How you balance. How do you balance for all those hours on that thick, muscular tail, head held so high over the river that brought you to this land, before you crawled out of it with such dignity and realized that you couldn't breathe outside of water? Gills snapped shut, you lost your life at the mouth of the Singapore River, and people covered you in concrete, the way we cover everything in concrete in this country, and made you a monument to interspecies relationships. Oh, Merlion, how you sacrificed yourself for us, throwing yourself at the feet of our great nation preserved for eternity. Oh, Merlion, I've never felt like this about any animal before, but you are so much more than animal. Oh, Merlion, sometimes you make me want to touch your scales with my fingers and tell you it's okay. Everybody loves you now. Oh, Merlion, sometimes you make me want to do a call and response. When I say mer, you say lion. Mer. Lion. Mer. Lion. When I say lion, you say mer. Lion. Mer. Lion. Mer. That's the evil brother of the Merlion. Oh, Merlion, sometimes I wish you had paws, and then you could hug people. Then you could hug me, as I have always dreamed of holding you in my minuscule arms that cannot even encircle your entire upper body. If you had paws, you would probably hold a Chris. I'm not entirely sure what a Chris is, but it sounds relevant to this poem. Actually, it sounds a bit dangerous, but that's okay, Merlion, because I like danger. You can hold it to my throat while I stroke your glorious mane and lick your soft ear and tell you nervously, it's okay, Merlion, because you are big and strong and beautiful and everyone loves you. And then I will unsheath my own Chris and plunge it into you while you cry out in a unique exotic roar that sounds somewhere between a lion's mating call and a dolphin's click. I want to make love to you, Merlion, the way your lion father made love to your fish mother. I want to ride you, Merlion, the way no one has ever ridden you before or ever. I will ride you wildly through the oceans of development and progress. I want to ride you, Merlion, the way Simba would ride Flipper, the way Mufasa would ride Nemo, the way Free Willy would ride Simba's mother, whose name I can't remember, but I will not, Merlion, because that would be very painful for me. Because you are covered in concrete, like everything else in this country. This next one, it was entitled When They Ask About Us, very nice and sapphic, and it got published under that title, but I really prefer its original title, its working title, which is called Drinking Milo Dinosaurs with Medusa. Are people familiar with the Medusa myth? Yes? Yeah? So essentially, I basically reimagine Medusa, because I was reading the myth and I was like, okay, is it really bad things happened to her, right? She was basically a victim of sexual assault, and then to punish her, they basically were like, oh, you're bad because you're a victim of sexual assault, so we're going to make sure you turn men into stone every time you look at them. So this poem's inspired by the idea of like, is it such a bad thing to turn men into stone if you're not into men? So basically I imagine Medusa as a Singapore lesbian. And this is told from Medusa's perspective as well, on a date. The snakes are not as bad as everyone says. You didn't expect this. I can tell from your expression. The snakes are nut brown, about the thickness of a pen. I've taught them to sleep under my cap when I go out. Your shoulders say you're trying to act casual, but don't worry. I haven't actually been with that many women myself. It's still all over that Reddit thread, isn't it? Of Poseidon's hidden webcams, that live stream that caught everything from the fangs to the screaming. Heard he sold it to some website, sold the rights to 20th Century Fox. The difference between a crime and a scandal is always who leaks the story first. If I ask you, say you never saw it. Say you're not on the internet that much. Put your hands on mine, keep your voice low. When you ask what remains, bite your lip, awkward pause. It's all in the past now, right? Dip a finger into your Milo dinosaur, lick the powder off. Pull me in for a kiss at a traffic light, and I will almost believe it myself. A yell, my name twisted sour in some strange guy's mouth across the road, a backwards glance, a wink, and we can almost feel as the wind in his throat freezes. Take my hand as we keep walking, as the people around him start to scream. If you keep a straight face, I promise not to laugh too loudly. And you thought that you were the one offering me protection? When they ask about us, don't tell them how I put your hand on my belly so you could feel the kicking, how you rolled your eyes as I spoke of horses, of hooves, of wings, as we held hands on my single bed. History will call it half God. History will forget the sparks of two bodies coming together under a half moon as they began to speak in tongues, in knee, in teeth, in whimpers, as you melt between my lips, as you drip, as I lap you up. And when I find myself waking up to your wet mouth on my shoulder, I will wonder where it was that I learned how to turn women into water. So this next one, I wrote it, I think, just before the pandemic, and so most of my experience performing this is actually for Zoom poetry readings to some very enthusiastic people. So I don't actually know if it's how good it is, because these are all very enthusiastic people in the lockdown, and this is inspired by Hans Christian Andersen and the story of how he wrote The Little Mermaid, which is the story behind the story, which I've been told by a Twitter thread is also a myth in itself. Someone broke it down, but yeah. Anyway, we don't care about Twitter threads in poetry because they make things boring. But anyway, the story is that what I've heard is that Hans Christian Andersen wrote the story of The Little Mermaid because he had a crush on a prince, and who was getting married, and he was really sad, so he wrote Little Mermaid. And so this is a poem inspired by that story. Called Somewhere. A mermaid is writing about Hans Christian Andersen and how his legs cross and uncross when he is anxious. She's not as jealous as you might think. Somewhere a mermaid writes about Hans Christian Andersen trapped on an island while his prince marries a princess as per the rules in fairy tales, waves crashing against rocks like the sound of mermaid bodies smashing against shore, limp from the agony of tales tearing themselves apart. She likes how you can't taste your own tears in the sea. Somewhere, a mermaid writes to Hans Christian Andersen to tell him that things will not be okay, except maybe in this moment with one foot in this kingdom and one foot in her world, points to the sea foam and says at least men who love princes still have souls, even if the world won't believe it for another 200 years. But at least mermaids get 300 years before dissolving into seawater. And somewhere a mermaid is writing a story about Hans Christian Andersen, writing a story about a mermaid, believes if she writes fast enough, she can write him a happily ever after, so he can write her a happily ever after. And somewhere Hans Christian Andersen is on an island writing a story about a mermaid while his true love marries a princess, and he is not sad. He is laughing, tells the mermaid that she has always been free to write her own happy ending. And somewhere a mermaid is begging Hans Christian Andersen not to let her die at the end of the story, or at least not to have to choose between dying a virgin and murder. Somewhere the sea foam is laughing. Somewhere a mermaid throws down her pen, her dagger, throws herself into the sea, feels water rush into her lungs for the first time, scratches her neck bloody for a chance at gills, her body liquefying, evaporating, floating out of water past palaces, cliffs, into clouds, and fuck you, Hans Christian Andersen, she laughs, and somewhere a mermaid is writing about a prince who loves princes, who achieves immortality at last through his stories, how they preserved her in bronze, how they memorized his face so they could sculpt it out of gold 100 times over. Somewhere the sea foam is writing a story about how princes are just a means to an end, and legs just a way to get there faster. Somewhere a mermaid is writing a story about me, another mortal trying to turn everything they read on the internet into metaphors and moral lessons. And once, she writes, there was a human too foolish to tell the difference between messengers and fairy tales. Okay, so you throw a party and everybody you have ever been attracted to is there. The girls in the baggy t-shirts in the car park look a bit too young to be smoking. They have been frozen in time, look exactly as you remember them from Jurong Point in 2001, and you are still too shy to ask for a light. The hockey captain with a spiked hair and gorgeous calf muscles is smirking at you by the door, and she is laughing with the first girl in junior college to have an undercut and 4 piercings in her ear, because of course they would be friends. And behind them is your netball player crush from Sec 4, staring down at her phone, trying to ignore the girl from your university women's rugby team with the small brown eyes, who is talking about the Hong Kong Sevens to the guy with the large black eyes and the shaved head from the men's rugby team and your first political science class, and also that annoying class chairperson rugby guy with the crazy big upper arms from your Methodist JC1 class. And the girls in the baggy t-shirts are like, what the hell? We thought this was only a women-only party. And you're like, honestly, so did I. As the boy who played Joseph in the St. Ignatius Sec 1 Christmas nativity play asks you where the toilet is, you say, I don't know who invited all these, as a tall bearded figure puts an arm around you and whispers something into your ear about a French guy starting a fight on the dance floor with a short skinny skinhead from the West Midlands. And this is what you're into? Asks the tall bearded person who taught you how to roll cigarettes, and you say, well, we shared a bed once. Another tall, scruffy, blue plaid shirt drunk whom you stopped being scared of when you ended up in the same poetry workshop a few years ago stands a bit too close and says, so we were roommates for a year, and you never told me you found me hot. And you say, don't kid yourself, I still hate you. 2 people in a corner with skinny jeans and just the right, this was written a while ago, and skinny jeans were popular or something, and just the right amount of purple in their hair, wink at you and give you a thumbs up. A girl in a collared shirt taps you on the shoulder, asks if you know who those fat bearded guys standing in the back porch are, and why there's so many goddamn white people here, and why do so many of them have dreadlocks, and why are there not more women here who look like actual women, and do you know what the overall percentage of Y chromosomes at this party is and what that says about you? And you smile politely, take a long swallow of your beer, turn around and break into a run. You heard a rumor that people were getting naked by the pool. It's just called Instructions on Sharing a Bed. And also it's quite new, and I don't think I've really read it out before, at least, yeah, so. Instructions on Sharing a Bed. Contrary to popular belief, a floor in an abandoned building with a raincoat on it is still a bed. Sorry. Because you will still stop believing in God when they don't smile back at you in 3 days. Never admit that you've never shared a bed with a friend, the same way you must never admit that you're a virgin at 22. And when he says he missed the last train home and your hotel is around the corner, remember that it is only human to huddle together for warmth in a non-sexual manner. Remember, a year from now, he still won't believe you write poetry in English. Consider the first time you slept with someone during junior college assembly. The 2 of you sitting next to each other cross-legged, nodding off in front of the stage at 6 a.m. How that night you wrote in your diary, I can't believe I slept with a boy on my first day of JC. But if this was a joke, why do you still remember his name? Side effects may include body aches, fatigue, nausea, pins and needles, hitchhiking to France, because you thought you were going to be hitchhiking with a guy you shared a mattress with last week, but it turned out to be a different person named Pete. When you wake up at 3 a.m. and she isn't by your side because she's having a panic attack and hyperventilating in your bathroom, tell yourself that those are her demons, not yours. Oh wait, oops, sorry, now they're also yours. And remember, you definitely dreamt of him rolling over to hug you that 2 a.m. that night. And remember that the fact that he hugs you to sleep for 2 weeks straight doesn't mean he actually wants to sleep with you. He's too cheap to buy a good heater. And yes, remember this, years later, when you only dare to mumble the word love half asleep at 1 a.m. so that neither of you can recall whether it was a dream or not, that someone touching your face while lying next to you will hurt you more than sex ever will. And never forget that dreams are just an accumulation of tension and mostly mean nothing until maybe tomorrow morning. How limbs are prone to flailing, clinging during sleep. It's really not that deep. In the grand scheme of things, this could mean anything, but probably doesn't. Alright, so my last one, it is I want to say it's a poem about nature, but it got too depressing, so I put an archbishop into it. It's that, or it's a poem about dialects, but that got too depressing, so I put a bunch of trees in it. I'll leave it up to you. It's called, so the title, I borrowed it from a lyric from one of my favorite bands called The Hold Steady, and it's called, we got to the part of the Mass where the Archbishop does the homily. We got to the part of the Mass where the Archbishop does the homily, and I'd mentioned I'd never heard an accent like that before. Oh yeah, so a bit of context, this was during COVID, when my family wasn't going to church, so many Catholics went to church via YouTube, because the Archbishop of Singapore started putting stuff on YouTube, basically became a YouTuber, and basically my family listened to him until basically got irritated by his voice. Anyway, so we got to the part of the Mass where the Archbishop does the homily, and I mentioned I never heard an accent like that before. My father told me it's because the Archbishop is Teochew and went to Montfort, as if that was an explanation. And isn't it funny to hear the accent of your dialect group and what it sounds like for the first time at 33? My father claims he can tell if a person is Teochew and went to Catholic school and grew up in Hougang in the 50s based on how he pronounces certain words. The other day, my father says, an old woman came up to him in a waiting room and said that she could tell that he was from Serangoon by the way he spoke into his phone, the way accents evolve into dialects, the way plants evolve into species, even on the tiniest of tropical islands, to fit the hundreds of tiny landscapes they find, the forests, the swamps, and all the ones that disappeared before they declared the first patch of forest here in Bukit Timah reserved, once they had cleared out all the Chinese squatters. And at the foot of Bukit Timah Hill, there's a picture of a church near my mother's childhood home, started by a French priest who knew enough Teochew to preach sense into them. And I am told it's a rough-sounding dialect. How they only saved that forest because the rest of the country was on fire, soil sucked flammable by cash crops. And my mother tells the story of the lalang next to the kampong behind her childhood bungalow bursting into flames, how it took 3 hours to put it out. Because when you rip out old roots and replace them with species that feast on everything left, the soil can take centuries to recover. My mother still misses the attic roof houses and the roosters, but still blames herself for actually marrying someone who really grew up in a kampong. Our family's dirty secret is how my father spoke only Teochew until he was 7. We still laugh at him when he says broad walk and Olympics. I still call myself Teochew when I order the porridge.